One South Africa movement leader, Mmusi Maimane, has revealed that he has requested a meeting with International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor over the human rights and political crisis in Eswatini. President Cyril Ramaphosa visited Eswatini last month and secured an agreement to hold a national dialogue. Mr. Maimane is hoping to get a progress report from Minister Pandor, and he joins us live now. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. So you have some questions that you would like to share with us, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. Certainly, I think the crisis in Eswatini is busy unfolding. I think South Africans ought to join in solidarity with the SADC region to demand that a democratic change, in fact, take place in Eswatini. We are demanding knowledge about the stability of the region and about ensuring that what the citizens are demanding is not the annihilation of the monarch, but that in fact democratic leadership, that the opposition is protected and the processes are ensured. This is crucial that we intervene earlier on, as many of the members of parliament who have come from Eswatini have fled to South Africa and are now seeking refuge here. This was the situation that unfolded in Zimbabwe. This was a situation that unfolds in many countries, and I believe that South Africa has a crucial role to ensure that it creates stability, not only in the region, but provides leadership for the continent, both from the perspective of human rights and ultimately being able to guide constitutional democracies across the region.
In terms of this meeting with the International Relations Minister, have you had maybe any feedback as yet?
Well, we certainly, in commemoration of International Day of Freedom and South Africa's own constitution on Friday, have written to our office. I'll await confirmation over the next couple of days, and certainly will accommodate the meeting. We think it's important that as fellow South Africans, we stand in solidarity with other Africans, especially at a time that, like us as South Africans, you'll recall during apartheid, many people stood in solidarity with us. And therefore, I think it's important that when we see an injustice committed in another country and we stand as citizens who uphold democracy, that we support. So I'll be awaiting confirmation of that meeting and will accommodate it as soon as the Ministry of International Relations avails itself.
You rightfully mentioned that this is not the first time that envoys are sent to particular countries on the continent. You mentioned Zimbabwe, we think of Ethiopia, yet situations remain the same. With my very limited appreciation or understanding of international relations, what do you propose then needs to change? These countries also have, a right to self-determination. So what then to do on the part of South Africa?
Yeah, and I think that principle is one that we uphold. The idea of self-determination is always vital until the actions that ordinary citizens want to take towards that are suppressed. When there's a use of force, methods such as suppressing media outcomes, ensuring that when elections are held, they aren't always free and fair, then countries like South Africa, who have an ability to be able to intervene, need to do so. And therefore, I think it's not just a question of sending the president there to meet with the king. It's a requisition that ultimately we meet with the opposition collectively, be able to establish a transition that works so that there's interventions, even not only from South Africa's own support only, but from countries like Botswana, countries along the region, to ensure that a delegation is sent there, to ensure that once those elections are taking place, that citizens are able to express their views with the security of knowing that there will be no repercussions against their actions. I think that the ill treatment of opposition is often symbolic of where the country is at in the democratic pathways. And what we are seeing in Eswatini at the moment is a regression away from that, rather than a strengthening of democratic processes. So therefore, it is my call that South Africa send a much broader delegation that meets with all sides of the story, map out a pathway towards a transition, and ultimately for Eswatini to be held accountable for those actions.
One thinks of ECOWAS, for instance, whenever there's instability in one West African nation, very quick for them to come out, not only in condemnation, but in finding a solution, going as far as imposing sanctions. What has been your assessment of SADC? I ask you that in particular relation to some sectors of society believing that South Africa is put under too much unnecessary pressure. Is that something fair to say?
It is, and I think I can remember being in Senegal when the president of the Gambia was then at the time installed. And through the actions of the ECOWAS region, you will recall that when the Gambia had already declared its own elections, the incumbent refused to step down, and therefore there was strong action that was taken by the ECOWAS region. And that must be applauded when you consider that it was a collective effort, that countries in that region took a strong stance for democracy and trade and allowing the Gambia to take its own course of action subsequent. I think SADC, post the reneging of the agreement, certainly by the then President Robert Mugabe, has suddenly taken a stance that says that we almost, if you like, turn a blind eye to many other actions. And now while South Africa is engaged in actions around Mozambique, Malawi, etc., I do think we need a collective response. And certainly South Africa, unfortunately, there's a biblical adage that says, to whom much is given, much is expected. We need to provide leadership in the region. We need to ensure that we take strong actions, and we need to coalesce with peace-loving and democratic citizens across the region who want to make sure that Eswatini is stabilized. Because if we fail to do that, we create a culture upon which others, as we've seen in other parts of Africa, simply usurp democratic processes. So South Africa has that burden to carry and a burden to lead, and ultimately Naledi Pandor cannot be left exempt around this particular issue. It's for that particular reason we have diplomacy. It's for that particular reason we need to be able to collectively coalesce and act. And therefore, I'm calling for strong action now. And if we need to impose sanctions, and certainly knowing that Eswatini has a lot of dependencies in South Africa, I think we need to be able to use that might so that we can ensure that we stand with citizens in that country.
You mentioned the word citizens. What is it that you and I can do, right? So in the absence, and I say that very loosely, of leadership, some of the conversations that we're having in this country are quite uncomfortable in terms of accepting people who are not necessarily from the country, right? And that could be due to a number of reasons. But when there's instability in one country, in a region, it spills over into the next. And that's what we see in the country.
I think all of us, and one of the actions will be taken is obviously going to the embassy of Eswatini to be able to stand and protest there. And I think South Africans, we must be able to do likewise. Secondly, we need to, when I was in Kenya, the Kenyans reminded us how so many of them contributed to the struggle against apartheid in various means, whether those were financial, whether those were in protest, whether those are about in making sure that they put pressures on their own government to act. They demonstrated solidarity back then. And so as ordinary citizens, now it's time for us to do likewise. We need to show that ultimately we equally so uphold freedom in the region. And I'm calling upon all South Africans to say, let's stand together, let's protest at the Eswatini embassy, and we'll communicate details to that effect. Let's ensure that we keep pressure on our government to act and take decisive actions. We cannot just simply have these envoy visits and ultimately they amount to nothing. We need to, as citizens, keep accountability, because if we turn a blind eye on Eswatini, the people of Eswatini and the region will turn a blind eye when those same atrocities could potentially in the future be committed against us by a liberation movement that begins to lose power.
You find, though, some sectors in that population that will defend the monarchy to no end. Perhaps the older generation, as we saw, it was young people who took to the streets. It was students that were thrown in jail. What to do in a situation like that? Because we also need to appreciate that aspect of it, right?
No, I can appreciate that this is an intergenerational battle. But what we are asking for is not that the monarchy be in any ways treated unfairly. We are simply demanding democracy. And I think that, as we've seen in South Africa ourselves, we've got monarchs that sit, we've got the Zulu monarch, we've got the Xhosa monarch, and all the respective tribes in our country have got monarchs. But we still remain a republic in that sense. We remain with a head of state who is given powers that are imbued from the constitution. I think that's what the people of Eswatini are only asking for. And therefore, regardless of which side of the argument you want, the last place you want is for a place where democratic rights of citizens are taken away. If for at least one thing, whether you are pro the monarch or not, support human rights, stand for human rights, because it's those rights that ensure that people have got freedom of speech, freedom of dignity, freedom to be able to move around freely, and freedom of political affiliation, whether they choose to side with the opposition or not. Once you suppress those, then I think all of us, regardless of which side you stand on, need to stand in solidarity with the people of Eswatini.
One SA movement leader, Mr. Mmusi Maimane, thank you.